Hello, everyone. I'm Graeme Park, and welcome to another Creative Futures session where I talk to a variety of creative industry professionals in front of an audience of students from Glyndwr University. Today's guest is an artist, a lecturer, a researcher, and project manager working at the intersection of art, science, and technology across the creative industries. She currently works with Cardiff Animation Festival and teaches creative and therapeutic arts at the University of South Wales. Her PhD with Transtechnology currently explores arts critique as a method of exploring the limits of artificial intelligence brain modelling. Please welcome Laura Welsman to Creative Futures. Hello.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
No, thank you very much for joining us and talking to our students. Lots of exciting stuff to talk about with you, Laura. But first of all, can we go back to the young Laura? When did you know or realize you wanted to be an artist, and how did you achieve that goal?
I think I always wanted to be an artist, but I think you're constantly told as you're growing up that it's not really a feasible, viable career choice. The arts have certainly changed even since I was young. And when I got to the stage just before the one that you're all at university, I was asked, what A levels are you doing and what do you want to do in the future? You're asked to make some very big decisions. Originally, I actually chose business management because I thought this is sensible. And then doing business management, realised that it wasn't for me, and there were things that we studied on business management that I was actually very interested and passionate about. So one of the people that really inspired me to quit the course that wasn't right for me was Carl Jung, psychoanalyst, who came up with many pioneering theories, one of the most famous psychoanalysts alongside Freud. And that really led me into studying fine art instead.
What did he say to inspire you or to make you make that switch?
So in business, you might have come across something called the Myers-Briggs personality test, which is an archetypal test which puts you into one of 16 categories that then tells you whether you have more introvert or extrovert qualities, thinking or perceptive qualities. And all of this is quite esoteric, as psychoanalysis definitely was at the time. It's more of a scientific practice now. But it's those more esoteric sort of unusual explorations of the mind that made me think that art actually had some of the best answers to those things that we then integrate into everything that we do. And remarkably, whether it's corporate or education, it still underpins a lot of what we do in society.
So, but did you enjoy doing art at school?
That's a really good question. I think I enjoyed doing art at school up until A level, when it had very much become you are being assessed on these criteria. It's not as free form anymore. You have exams. And this is what we want from you, this is what we want to do, which seemed to put really strange boundaries on a really free and expressive process. And I think that partially led to me deciding to do something more sensible afterwards.
I suppose do stuff more sensible that you could be more easily assessed on, because our art, by its very nature, is a creative area. But of course, that's the area that you now work in, and your website's got some great examples of your work. So when did you realize that you could actually call yourself an artist, and that was how you made your living?
I think it's when I realized that you could do things off your own volition and kind of put yourself out there and take some risks. And by doing things like exhibitions that we set up for no money with friends, just by being put in that space, you become an artist. And that's something that you kind of wrestle with a little bit. It's like, am I an artist? I'm not getting paid for my work yet consistently. But just the fact that you're making and that you're being creative and you're producing something, eventually I came to terms with the fact that no, that does make you an artist. It does make you a creative, even if you're not necessarily painting.
But you said you worked with other people to put on, was it like exhibitions of your stuff, etc. Was that people you already knew, or was that people that you had met as an artist and had started to collaborate with? And tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so that the process of becoming an artist with other people is really a snowballing effect, and I think it's quite similar across the creative industries. And it really just started with people who were in the studios next to me in third year, coming up with an idea, a premise for an exhibition. We had a creative idea, maybe trying to get a little bit of funding somewhere or a local brewery to provide the beers for it. And just by doing that, by putting yourself out there, other people will be attracted to what you're doing. And that's how I became part of the wider artist community in South Wales, at least. You start changing the sorts of exhibitions, the sort of work that you're doing. It opens the door to new kinds of collaborations. So yeah.
Yeah. So how I mean, an artist generally will work on their own. I mean, I know people do collaborate, but did you have to kind of learn to work with other people, and was that a difficult process? Because creative minds can often clash, but equally creative minds can equally really gel.
So I think that exhibitions are one of the easiest ways to work with other artists, and you're absolutely right. Creative minds, we can often be sort of fixated. We can have eccentric personalities. We might have demands for our own work in order to protect it because it's very, very personal. But an exhibition, because everybody has an understanding of there's kind of a respect to personal work, personal creative work, and you're coming together to share in that space. If you're doing that as a self-starting group, there is kind of an understanding there. I think it's very different if you're a curator or a project manager managing artists who aren't part of that process, because you might then be subject to artist demands that you need to budget for, need to manage logistics and arrangements. So I certainly think getting the people around you that you know and are maybe like-minded with and coming together on something is much, much easier than when you start operating in a very specific role as part of an organisation. But that's something you learn as well.
Of course. What about working with people that are from different fields? Have you got any experience of that? And what advice would you give to someone if you have to work with someone that you might not get on with?
That's a really good question. And on our course, I think is a really good example of that. So the course I teach at University South Wales, we employ art therapists and counsellors who only work in psychology, for example, and have no art experience and continuously say, I'm not an artist, but I'm doing this very specific part, which is based on psychology. And then you've got the artists as well who are teaching art modules, etc. And then we have modules like creativity and well-being that use both art and a scientific method within psychology. So we have had instances, for example, where you come together and look at student work and you cannot meet in the middle. It's not necessarily a clashing of minds or personalities, but you absolutely have to learn techniques of communication so that you can meet the same goal of an understanding of where your work intersects, and looking at focusing on good ways to work together if that's not working. I think the problem of working together becomes the priority over the work sometimes, but understanding that that's a strong possibility usually engenders good results.
But presumably a lot on this journey and working with people from different areas, you're going to pick up transferable skills that you think, oh, I might try and apply that to my own practice.
absolutely. So in that sense, any experience is good experience. When I left university, I worked in call centres and banks at the same time as getting my artistic practice going. And there were definitely things that I learnt in those places, even though some of them were quite horrible jobs that I didn't enjoy, now benefit me as both an artist and a researcher or a lecturer. So yeah, in that sense, any experience is, as long
Yeah.
as you're focusing on learning on from it. Yeah.
Well, of course, but on that same theme, you said you were doing business studies. There must have been. I mean, you obviously. I know you're a lecturer and a researcher, but before that, you must have been a freelance, working for yourself, artist. There must have been things you learned from your business studies that you managed to apply to being a self-employed freelancer.
Definitely. And I think a big one is finance. I think that when you become a freelancer, the money can seem like an insurmountable task to learn. And it's things like taxes and budgeting or providing budgets for other organisations. That's just an example of something that business studies gave me a little bit of a head start at, a bit of an insight in how to manage that myself. Yeah.
No, I know, I can imagine, because I mean, one of the things that we talk about is how to set up as a sole trader or partnership or limited company, etc. And you must have had a little advantage over most creative minds who set out. But what about funding? I mean, you said you worked in call centers, presumably just to have some money coming in, but your business. How did you fund it before, with the call center work aside?
So I think I started by getting little jobs here and there, and work experience is really valuable, but I would never advocate for anyone working for free. I think in the creative industries, sometimes there's an understanding that we do some things for free that we might not have as much experience in.
Well, what about volunteering though? Rather than being asked to do this for free and I'll put in a shout for you later. I mean, specifically, I want to go and volunteer for 3 months or 2 months. There's the difference, isn't there, the two?
It is. And it's invaluable to do volunteering. And you did just remind me as well that one of the ways I got into all of these roles is by working for the National Museum of Wales as a volunteer. So just by doing one Sunday afternoon a month, tour guiding the museum and offering the public in, it was quite scary because I didn't have the experience to be paid for it, but it looked excellent on my CV, and it was a way of throwing myself into the deep end in an environment where there was an understanding I was a volunteer. So absolutely, yeah, volunteering is a great way to.
But of course, you get the experience of being a tour guide and talking to groups of people, which presumably that's a transferable skill you can apply to being a lecturer.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I hadn't done that, I don't think I'd be as confident teaching 120 students at once.
So, I mean, tell us about that. The part of your journey. How did you go from being like a freelance artist to a university lecturer, considering you wanted to do business studies?
I think it's about a real breadth of experience and working out when to take opportunities or not to take opportunities. Also, you might have to start turning some things down. You can't volunteer forever just because the projects are really fun or endless adding to your CV. But it's about putting yourself out there and finding the places that are doing the kind of work you're interested in and emailing them and asking them whether they need someone, or continuously searching for opportunities that might be relevant to you, and just building that experience up bit by bit. Even if it's small projects, it all starts to accumulate into being able to apply for a role within this organisation where you do really want to work, and then that enables you to apply for a slightly more advanced role in another organisation doing something different.
I mean, were you actively looking to become a lecturer, or I mean, how did you just contact the University of South Wales, or did you hear about an opportunity?
So that very much came from deciding that I wanted to do additional study. So I was
Right.
was working at the Arts Council of Wales, and I was working as a project administrator, and had sort of decided I don't know how to get extra experience to get a better job at the moment. Luckily, the Arts Council are an organisation that do want to upskill their staff. So within a role that you already have, asking for training and asking for continuous professional development opportunities, as they call them, is really, really important, because then you're both supporting yourself and you're growing. So what I decided to do then was a master's in research, because it was something I was interested in. Arts Council gave me 1 day a week to go and do that. And because I really loved that, I realised there were transferable skills in the master's degree and within the Arts Council job I was doing that could lead me to project management work, to support then doing a PhD, which is what I did. And then the combination of experience in the creative industries with a PhD and with research sort of led me to realise, well, the next step is to lecture and share this knowledge and also support the completion of the PhD.
You sound like a lot of the creatives that we've had on this program kind of know what they like and what they want to do, but kind of not drift, but get drawn in different directions, and quite often will accidentally find something. I mean, I'm an example of that. I never thought I'd end up being a lecturer. It's not something I really wanted to do, but I've been doing it since 2008. You sound like you're a bit more not determined, but you've kind of mapped things out. You've given it more thought. Is that a fair thing to say?
I think the last few years that has been fair to say. I think that a path has become clearer. But when I was at university, when I left university, I had no idea what opportunities were out there. And similarly, I was finding a little bit of something over here, a little bit of something out over here that was quite different, with no real direction at all. I was just putting a bit of faith in the process and trusting that it would lead somewhere.
Yeah.
And only now, the path seems a bit clearer, maybe 12 years later.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Again, that's the same as everyone else, but you just sound like you've given it a bit more thought, I think. But you did say earlier that you grab opportunities. It just seems to me like the opportunities you've grabbed have really kind of inspired you. What about funding? How would any artist who wants to, follow a path to you in Wales, have you got any tips or advice or anything you can talk about funding in Wales?
I think there's a big secret around funding, and that is how to write a good application and turn your creative idea into a project that somebody wants to fund. And that can be quite difficult. The best way to do it is to talk to somebody who's already had funding in some way, because they will give you an idea of the kind of things they want you to say, the kind of ways that they want you to pitch your creative idea. And it's really something that is hard to know how to do until you've done it. If you are able to find someone to have a quick chat with about your project, even if it's a funding body who want to fund your kind of work, pick up the phone and talk to them. We saw lots of applications at the Arts Council that had never picked up the phone because they thought maybe it wasn't the right thing to do, and as a result didn't get the funding.
I think that's really good advice, because someone who had zero, apart from my senior lecturer salary, zero income from everything else I do as a practicing creative, throughout COVID, I found myself for the first time in my life applying for funding through the Arts Council of England. And that's what I did. I contacted people who'd done it, and it really helped. I was unsuccessful, but now I've got the experience. And even though I don't have to worry about income at the moment, and we're kind of slowly getting back to normal, I'm definitely going to keep my eye on grants and stuff to apply for. So signing up, I mean, presumably people should sign up to mail outs about things like that as well. And also, I would imagine networking's very important as a creative.
It really is, and it means that other people are more likely to pull you into their projects as well that they're seeking funding for. But as Graeme just said, that the newsletters for funding bodies and the Arts Council, for example, are invaluable because they will tell you whenever an opportunity is coming up, wherever there's a little pot of money. And you know, the funny thing is that a lot of organisations are putting on projects or funding projects for people like you who've just left, who are just leaving university, maybe need a few more skills, a bit more training, a bit of a leg up into the industry, but it's hard for them to reach you. So if you're more aware of those opportunities, then you're more likely to get the money, which seems like a very obvious thing to say.
What about, I mean, apart from traditional face-to-face or phone call and email networking, what about social media? Does that play a part in what you do?
I personally have a great dislike for social media, but it is an intrinsic part.
It's one extreme or the other with the creatives here. They either absolutely love it or, like you just said, have a bit of an issue with it. Yeah. Well, but not even something like LinkedIn, which is kind of more of a professional setup with a lot of artists actually on there.
I think my life would have been easier if I had engaged with social media a little bit more.
Right.
And certainly if you have your own creative practice, whether it be music, a television program, pilot, animation, whatever it is, if you have something like Instagram or LinkedIn for professional opportunities, I don't know much about TikTok, but I get the picture. It's a little bit like Instagram. But if you're sharing your work, there's no beating it for getting the word out about something special.
No, as a visual, if you're a visual artist, I think Instagram is a fantastic platform that doesn't cost you much. And it's about connecting with people doing the same things and just shouting to the world, here I am doing my thing. I got a question from Katie, who's curious about any obstacles or barriers you might have faced and how you overcame them on your journey so far. If you can think of any obstacles or barriers.
I think there have been lots, but I think it's a really good question. I think fitting into certain boxes and knowing what people want from you can be difficult and is something that you gain from experience. So that might be applying for a job, it might be applying for funding, but something I think that we're sometimes scared to do if we're doing something big like that is asking questions. And I wish I'd asked more questions because I think that would have helped me overcome some more of those barriers.
I'm with you on that. I mean, I'm older than you, but when someone looks back, or when I look back, I think I had the courage to not think I know it all and ask more questions. Because now I'm in a position where people ask me questions. I always think, good for you, and I wish I'd done the same. So let's artist, lecturer, researcher, project manager. What projects do you manage? Tell us a bit more about that.
So project management is really sort of overseeing all aspects of a creative project. It's not the most fun part of doing a creative project, but it's brilliant experience, and it really gives you an opportunity to learn in a holistic way how to run with a creative idea. So in terms of the Cardiff Animation Festival, for example, which ran in April, that means programming all of the amazing animations into a week long of events. It means room bookings, it means talking to animators and making sure they're happy with how their work is being shown. It means talking to funders and sponsors and asking them if they'll support the festival. It means reaching out to audiences and presenting what you're doing as something they want to come and see as well. So it's a really good, well-rounded way of understanding how to run a project, which I imagine most of you will do at some point in your careers.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds fascinating. It sounds just like running it's like running a business, really, isn't it?
It is.
Just, yeah.
Yeah.
And so your PhD, now this sounds fantastic, and it's something it's not a speciality area for me at all, but your PhD with Transtechnology. So it's like art kind of colliding with digital technology, and then specifically artificial intelligence brain modeling. First of all, how does an artist end up working with science? I mean, the faculty that we're all in is the Faculty of Art, Science and Technology, but I'm not really aware of many of the art and design students working with the engineering students. So tell us a bit about more of that. It sounds fascinating.
Well, there's a good reason people aren't doing it widespread, and that's because it's really hard, and we don't have really effective ways of doing it at the moment, working between the arts and the sciences and technology, which is part of what this research that I'm doing is all about. So if I take you back again to my A levels, I was asked very clearly why on earth I'd picked science subjects alongside art. So I'd chosen art, biology, chemistry, and business studies. And at the time, there was nothing like a field like arts in health, which is a pioneering test pilot programme in the UK, specifically in Wales. So now there are lots of collaborations, for example, at CERN in Switzerland. They have an arts science residency project called Collide, and it's looking at ways that artists and scientists can work together. So my kind of proposition is that sometimes artists are used on these kinds of collaborations to illustrate what the sciences are doing in a very pretty, decorative, nice way, so that what we've learned from experiments can be communicated to everyone as in a more accessible way. What I'm sort of interested in is how can artists contribute in a more meaningful way to the process of science and the scientific method, because there is something that art does that the scientific method cannot do. So this research is about looking at the things that art does that sort of materialize things that aren't quantifiable or don't form part of the scientific process. Bear with me. In order to do that,
no, this is brilliant. This is brilliant.
In order to do that, we can look at brain modeling and artificial intelligence. So
what is brain mod? Just for the lay person, what is brain modeling?
So brain modeling is it can be two things. It can be something called bottom-up brain modeling, which is coding for every cell within the brain. So there's a project called the Blue Brain Project in Switzerland, and that they are trying to replicate a rat's brain at the moment, coding for the neurons over the whole brain. And then you have top-down brain modeling that seeks to simulate more complex processes of the mind. So that might be something like, how do we make a robot that looks like it can fall in love? So the problem with that one is that we know that the robot isn't actually falling in love, but it can emulate and make us feel like it might be.
Wow, my brain is kind of doing weird stuff now. This sounds great. What do you hope to achieve in these two, in art and science, coming together like this?
I suppose I'm hoping to find ways that we can, well, this is a bit overambitious, my research won't do this, but better ways that we can work across disciplines and make it so that the scientific method, which has become quite cold and specific, and people tend to work in silos, which means that different disciplines within the sciences work alone and often don't communicate with each other. We can sort of reinvigorate the scientific method with some knowledge about things that are more ineffable or unquantifiable or esoteric, because the scientific method now underpins everything that we do in the world. It's how we calculate economic projections and markets, and so it's just about looking at things from a critical perspective, from a different perspective.
Yeah, well, Katie, who asked a question earlier, has just pointed out that here at Glyndwr University, there's an MA transdisciplinary art and design practice, which encourages artists and designers to work with other disciplines. So I was slightly incorrect for saying that. I didn't say it didn't happen. I said I wasn't aware of it. So, but this is fascinating. What do you think as a scientist? And I suppose the stereotype is someone who's kind of very focused and driven by facts. How can a scientist be influenced by a creative? And again, a bit of a stereotype is someone who's a bit more kind of free spirited and a bit more loose as a person. What can they each learn from each other?
Well, one of the things I think they can learn is a way to communicate context. And what I mean there is when we make a discovery in science or when we make an advance or an observation, how does that impact everything that we know about the world? If we have a worldview that is no longer dictated by religion, so this used to be a Christian, fundamentally Christian country, for example, then where are we changing our overall worldview in order to accommodate discoveries within science? Philosophy is one way to do that, but it's becoming more and more clear that we need to look at other disciplines in order to understand contexts. So there's a really famous scientist called David Bohm, who was a physics professor who helped with the discovery of something like quarks or the way that quarks are built. And he was brought up a Catholic, and after making this discovery, decided that this then gave even more precedence for the existence of God, whereas science had seemingly previously seemed to not need ideas of God anymore, for example. So that's one example of how that works. Yeah.
Wow, this is fantastic stuff. Katie's asking again, do you still have your own art practice? Do you still, do you still paint and make things? And has your role as a lecturer, research, project manager and researcher, has that influenced or altered what you do as an artist?
That's a really, really good question. I think working in therapeutic studies has made me realise that it doesn't matter what I make. It's about the process and it's about the benefit of art making. That's what matters. So I feel less pressure to make something that I think is really good anymore. I don't think it's that important anymore.
But is that because you have the luxury of having like an income that you can rely on? Does that play a part in the creative process? Because you say, so if you weren't a lecturer or a project manager and you were just a struggling artist, would you not be more inclined to say, oh, I need to make money, I need to alter my work? Do you think you're able to have that luxury of doing what you like and not, as you say, not being bothered about it? Well, not bothered, but it's you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. I think that was part of my goal. So I never intended to make a full income off painting, because I knew that the art market and sort of corporatizing and commercializing my artwork would change it. Perhaps in a way that I didn't identify with or was forcible and I didn't particularly like, whereas I knew I could keep painting exactly what I wanted, with the opportunity to maybe sometimes sell a painting if I found a way to fund myself a different way. And I think that's just a choice that you have to make. Where are the influences on your work coming from, and how do they change what you're doing? I do still occasionally paint. This is one. That's one of the last.
Oh yes.
Painted.
Have you ever? Because I was looking at your website and you've got quite a lot of examples of your work on there. Have you ever done commissions? Has someone ever come to you and say, I want to pay you a lot of money to do something? And if so, what was that experience like working for a client who said they wanted something?
I have, and it was a completely different experience, obviously, to someone walking into a gallery and saying, I love your painting and I want to buy it exactly how it is. So I remember at university having a few commissions that I didn't particularly like. One of them was doing an oil painting about this big, like my normal oil paintings, of an album cover. That was somebody else's artwork for a start. Another one I had was a painting for the Harry Potter bus, and that took absolutely ages, and I didn't enjoy it at all. I think commissions can be nice if you are more engaged in your process, and your process maybe. I think painting is very, very expressive, and it kind of destroys the expressive element of painting.
But presumably you get paid to do these commissions, which is a benefit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why in one of my other roles, I do a lot of corporate work, which I don't necessarily enjoy, but I get paid a lot of money for, and it's not very often. Let go back to the Cardiff Animation Festival. How would an animator who wanted to get their work shown go about doing that?
So every 2 years before the festival, which is biannual, sort of before Christmas, we open an open submissions call, and you can submit your short film, whoever you are, even if you're an individual or if you're a group, from anywhere in the world, and then our team of curators watch all of the films and decide what makes it through, and then we make awards for the best films as well.
And presumably, if you just search Cardiff Animators Festival online, sorry, Max has just asked. He must have. What was the chat? What was that called? What was that? What do you mean, Max? Cardiff Animators Cardiff Animation Festival. That's it, isn't it? So presumably, there'll be a contact button on there or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So we call it an open call when we ask for people to submit things.
Okay. What have been your? Well, no. As before I come to that, did you have a light bulb moment when you know, art and science, that you thought, oh, that's what I need to explore? Was there a light bulb moment, or is it something that you just realized one day?
There was, but it's a bit strange.
No, we like strange. Come on.
So I'm quite interested in sort of religious technologies. So those are practices that are quite ritualistic, or maybe more like magical practices from different religions and different civilizations in history. So one of them is the Kabbalah within Jewish mysticism, and this is a diagram. One of the fundamental tools within it is called the Tree of Life, and it's a diagram. But this diagram, whereas it's very mathematical and it's just a shape that tessellates and repeats, actually codes for ineffable quantities. So those are things that you can't code for, that are things like understanding, mercy, knowledge. They're fundamentally ineffable principles. So I saw that some neuroscientists in New York had attempted to take that structure from the Tree of Life and put it into a brain modeling diagram. I'm not entirely sure that they were serious, but it was brilliant to see. And then I thought, okay, this work needs to be structured around diagrams and how artists use diagrams in order to engage with that coding process. So that was my light bulb moment.
Wow. It sounds like you take your inspiration, though, from a variety of sources. You've mentioned religion and science, and of course art as well. I think that's a fascinating kind of dichotomy of areas. Yeah, what have been your high points? And you're not allowed to say I've yet to hope that I've still got to reach my highest points. That's what everyone should say. But what have been your kind of career highs so far?
Winning some awards for my paintings has been really validating, because they can be quite unusual. They're childlike, and they're an acquired taste. But knowing that other people who have a lot of experience also like your work is very fulfilling. And I think that's just another way of putting yourself out there. If you do something creative, or you've done a piece of work that you want a bit of feedback on, or you want to sort of work out if there's recognition for it, going to competitions or exhibitions and things like that is a good way of doing that. But I'd say also to be a bit more sort of soppy. I think working with students and teaching and working with people in community arts is usually always a very good day, and getting someone to really understand something that you've passed on is always a really big highlight as well.
Oh, that's not soppy. That's really good. On the other side of that coin, though, what low points have you had, if any, and how have you dealt with them? I mean, because low points can they affect your self-esteem, and if so, how do you kind of rise above it?
We should have done this one first. I think when I was working in call centres and banks and in jobs I really didn't like, and I was still attempting to be creative, I really couldn't see any way of moving out of doing that, and I couldn't see a possibility of ever having a job that I would enjoy. I would say that I felt quite despairing at those times and disheartened, and that the only way of getting through it and kind of finding a way out of it was to just keep doing it and researching what was out there and imagining and learning more, and just getting through it, just doing it.
Yeah, but presumably that it was something that you did out of necessity. So surely that was at the back of your mind. But you must have had to work with people in that situation who you knew were there for the long haul. Who must have had you can't have had much in common with them. Was that difficult?
I think there's a camaraderie that kind of overrules those kind of differences. You're all working at British Gas together, making 100 phone calls a day. You kind of band together and make it all right for each other, and that's absolutely part of it. That's part of turning a bad experience into a good one.
Yeah, turning a bad experience into a good one. Another question here along similar lines. Have you ever had to deal with rejection, and if so, for like a job role or your work or whatever, and how do you deal with that?
All the time, and it's difficult to deal with, especially when I left university. I was maybe applying for jobs that I wasn't qualifying to get for yet, or if I was trying to show my work somewhere and it wasn't accepted. I have to say, for a while it was incredibly disheartening, and it would put me off applying for those things. The way to resolve that is to focus on the acceptance of rejection, and that actually it's not a reflection on you or your work. It's just a little bit extra time, a little bit extra learning, and it's more important to become okay with rejection so that you will just apply for things and put yourself out there. It's fine to get a no.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. But like you said, you learn from the process, and hopefully you can apply it to the future. What about a great question from Neil about the creative arts sector in Wales? What's the most positive thing about the creative arts sector in Wales right now?
The people tend to be very, very good in Wales. So the community is very co-supportive. People like to see each other. They like to see new work that people are making. But also Wales is growing as a place for experimental work. It's growing an international presence. People are really interested in what's coming out of Wales, and as a result, there are more opportunities growing here now. We've got Creative Wales, who have just developed a digital creative team from Welsh Government, for example, because they see a need for it here where excellent creative industry work is being done. So there really are growing opportunities in the country.
Do you think the Welsh identity is part of that? Even if you're not Welsh, but by living in Wales, you're going to, that kind of Welsh identity is going to rub off on you. Because I see that as a Scotsman, and I see the same thing happening in Scotland, which I suppose, again, it's okay, Scotland's slightly bigger, but it's got that kind of community that you get across country that you don't get in the massive, heavily populated England.
I think absolutely. And I think being English myself, I'm from Birmingham. I've been here for about 12 years now. there is an untouchedness to Wales, where it's managed to retain its identity, some of its core values. There are beautiful things from Wales, like singing and opera and craft and language, that are inherent parts of the identity that provide a good basis from all of this, all of the rest of this brilliant creative work, whether it's in technology or not, to stem from. So yes, I think it is.
What's on the future? What's on the horizon for you?
For me, I'll need to finish my PhD, so lots of writing. I am going to, because I've been working 2 jobs between the university and the Animation Festival and the PhD, I'm going to start building a shed in my back garden that is only for painting, because it's really important.
Are you going to build this shed? Build it yourself?
No, I will have help.
Oh, wow, okay.
I don't have the experience to build a shed myself, so it's going to be a learning process. But that would be great. And I also want to go out a little bit into the world and find out what work is being done related to my research. There are some artists in Copenhagen working to create artificial intelligences in a gallery space, for example, that you can talk to and interact with. So I'm going to, in the short term, hoping to go and speak to them, but that sort of thing.
Just briefly before we wrap up, what about COVID? How did that affect what you do, and what have you learned from that experience of not being able to go out and be with people?
It's hugely affected every aspect of the work that I do. So the arts organisations I worked for, I used to work for a circus in Bristol as well.
Circus?
A circus, yeah. Sort of, yeah. They're sort of choreographed. There's no elephants or anything like that. It's very fashionable circus. But there were emergency measures from places like the Arts Council, as you mentioned before. So it was very much all night, all day, applying for funding, making sure they had the money to stay open at least, because of course in the arts we're often dependent on our audiences. In terms of the university, working online, in terms of PhD and research group, not being able to see your peer group in person and have the conversations you used to have, not being together creates difficulties in every aspect. It's harder to work together, it's harder to communicate. You don't get those moments where you're not just focused on work together to have a cup of tea or whatever it is. But I think I've also learned that we all work very, very hard in the creative industries. And I think how hard everyone still had to work in a pandemic where the outcome was completely uncertain was remarkable. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. Well, one question I'd like to ask everyone at the end: if you could go back to your younger self, teenage Laura, who is, going to do business studies, where you are now, if you could go back, what would you say to your younger self?
I'd probably,
apart from ask more questions.
Yeah, ask more questions. I'd probably say, don't be too hard on yourself. Again, I think we all work really, really hard. You're all at university and you've been working really, really hard. We tend to have high expectations of ourselves, especially if we're coming from academia. I think I would say have faith in the process. You'll get somewhere, even if you don't know where that is. Have a bit of faith in yourself and don't be too tough on yourself. Brilliant.
Well, listen, Laura Welsman, thank you very much. That was a fascinating conversation. I enjoyed that immensely and learned a lot. Thank you very much for